Dan? Charlie? Anyone?
Hey, I can hear you. Are you doing a check?
Can anybody else hear me?
I
It's just
can
been
hear you.
silent. Okay.
Yeah, hi.
I think they must be having problems at their end. Oh. Hi, Marcus. It's all good now? I think you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kurt, you're on mute. We're just a very quiet bunch.
Time change.
No, still can't hear you. Still muted, it looks like.
Yeah, Kurt, you're showing up as mute still.
How about now?
There we go.
There we go. Awesome. Are we good to go, Van, or?
I think so. Are you recording now? I think you were before, but I didn't know because you kind of, oh yeah,
Yep.
I still see it being
It
recorded.
started a
Okay.
new recording 50 seconds in.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. Let me just take a look at the list of people. We have 17 people on. It's a small enough group. I think what we'll do is if you have a question, just raise your hand or just speak up. Just unmute yourself and ask a question. I think that's probably the easiest rather than wait till later, if that's okay. So thanks for having me. What I'm delivering today is a little different from what we normally do. We run an ag drone school and a drone spraying clinic and some advanced training for drones. We've been doing this since 2015. And the way it's a little different is we're actually doing stuff online. Almost everything we do has been in person and it's very hands-on. So on the first day, before we start talking about all the theory of vegetation indexes or anything like that, we get you flying drones, get you on the sticks. You get to understand the concept of how that thing flies, how you create the mission. So we do it kind of step by step. But your needs are a little different in your group than they are for the farmers that tend to come to our classes. So I'm going to try and focus more on the vegetation indexes, on the Pix4D processing, and just taking you through the workflow of processing data with a view to kind of getting you ready to collect data, stitch it properly, create the vegetation indexes, and ultimately pull data from research plots. What we're going to do is we'll spend about an hour and a half today, probably closer to an hour and a half. If I know myself, it's always a little hard to cut myself off. So it'll be closer to an hour and a half. And then after that, you'll have the chance to try out the software yourself. I'll give you a site where you can download data sets, you can download trial software. The focus today is going to be on Pix4D fields on one very specific piece of software, but there's other software that I'll share links to as well, so you can try others so you can kind of test the data with software and see what would meet your needs. And then on April 12th, we all meet again. That'll be in person. And that's when I get to put controllers in your hand and you can do some flying, and we'll have a whole bunch of different sensors along as well for you to try out. So we'll do that in person. So this is kind of our team. Max and Carla are going to be out in Manitoba this spring. If you know other people that want training, they're doing an ag drone school. They'll be in Virden as the only Manitoba location, but there's others that are close like Yorkton. And then Bianca and I are going to be out in Manitoba as well, in Russell and in Carman, putting on a drone spraying clinic. And that's in the days immediately before we meet you. So we'll stay an extra day to spend that day with you. So I just thought I'd start with a little bit of just why we're talking about this, what a drone does when it's in the hands of a farmer, an agronomist, or anybody that's collecting data with it. And conceptually, really, there's three elements. The fact that it's airborne gives you a different opportunity for collecting data than anything that's on the ground. Then secondly, it georeferences data. And lastly, by adding different sensors, it lets you see things that the human eye can't see. So what you're looking at here is some winter wheat. This was back in 2015 when I first started getting into drones, and I wanted to see what a drone was really capable of. So I didn't step foot on this field. I just tried to see what I could see with the drone itself. So just by getting airborne, that field looks a lot different. That's the same field from, you can see down here, this is my car sitting here. That's the picture that I took on the ground, and this is the picture from the air. You see patterns, you see the forest for the trees essentially, right? So you can see where there's headlands, where there's double seating. You can see some equipment issues here. You can see areas with poor production usually stick out more than the areas with good production just by getting airborne. Then once you start flying a grid pattern, which is ultimately what we're focusing on here is mapping workflows, you could get a piece of data as opposed to a picture. In that first image, the aerial image, you can still see things, but they're not georeferenced to the accuracy where you could even find that location easily on the ground, nor is it in a format where you could use it easily to navigate to that location on the ground. By using a mapping workflow, you georeference every point, so I know exactly where this blue dot is in that map. And then lastly, if you use a sensor other than a visible spectrum sensor, you can create health maps, stress maps, water stress. There's a whole bunch of different vegetative indexes that you can create by using software to do some math, and most importantly, by collecting near infrared light. It's all about the near infrared, not the infrared. I don't know to what degree all of you have remote sensing backgrounds, but people tend to confuse those two, the terminology with each other. Infrared is thermal or heat seeking. It's great for finding cattle in bush. It does have some uses in crop as well, things like finding an irrigation water line break, or some things like herbicide damage will show in the first few days because the plants are transpiring differently. But generally speaking, it's near infrared light that we're looking at. And now all of these are the same field, just presented differently, data collected differently. And really what we're trying to accomplish is give you the ability to create that last one, to create a map that accurately depicts what the crop health status looks like. So the sensors that are available for drones currently, I mean, we started with RGB and near infrared. RGB is red, green, blue. That's what the drone world calls camera, right? It's what you call camera. It's what you've got on here. These are all RGB sensors. They're silicon sensors that measure light from about 400 nanometers to 950 nanometers or so. It depends on the camera a little bit, but there's filtration that happens to those cameras, and I'll get into that in a second. There's also a whole bunch of other specific sensing systems that are for crop health mapping. So multispectral cameras are the one we're going to talk about. It's affordable and really gives you the biggest bang for buck in terms of giving you information about crop stress or health. There are hyperspectral cameras out there as well. We fly one in the summer. It's about $430,000. Data processing from an hour of flight takes about a week. It's not a commercial scale piece of equipment, even for researchers, I would argue, unless they're specifically developing some new algorithm. If there are new channels that you need, things like 1600 nanometers for moisture content, I mean, then hyperspectral is the only way that you're going to get that kind of data. Or if you want to do some machine learning to figure out which channels ultimately you would look for if you wanted to make a commercial sensor, then again, hyperspectral would be the way to go. But it's not something that you're going to use in everyday data collection on crop research plots. And then thermal and LiDAR, I think, do have a place. Thermal will show you the extent of soil even more clearly than multispectral will sometimes. It'll also show you things like I mentioned earlier, herbicide damage or sometimes water stress. But it's got very limited application, largely because the thermal sensors are so low resolution. So they don't give us the resolution that we need for small crop plots or even larger scale. The resolution just makes it very hard for the software to stitch that imagery. And then lastly, LiDAR was not a tool we were using in agriculture. I'm expecting a new sensor this week that I hope will give me higher resolution so we can actually measure the height of a standing crop. I have no illusions that I'm going to be able to see with this laser through canola to figure out how high that is at full canopy, but certainly for cereals and earlier in the season for canola even, we should be able to now measure the height of crop. LiDAR has been used for many years for measuring the height of trees. We're just imaging smaller trees by having higher resolution and more points. We won't go into those last three in any detail today. In the sample data sets that I share with you, there will be a LiDAR data set if you are interested in seeing what LiDAR data looks like. So the multispectral sensors really came initially from conversions of regular cameras. When you've got a silicon sensor, it measures somewhere in the 450 to 950 nanometer range is what gets through to that sensor. But there's something called an IR cut filter, typically. Everything over 700 or 720 nanometers is blocked so that the light doesn't even make it through to the sensor. And that's because these sensors, the eyes in our head, have adapted over the millennia to using what's most plentiful in the blue, green, and red channels, which we've named blue, green, and red. Obviously, they didn't exist before humans called them that, but those channels, those wavelengths are what we use. And because of that, cameras that have these silicon sensors that'll sense out to 950 have a filter to stop that light from getting through to the sensor. So the easy way to create crop health imaging systems is to just remove that IR cut filter and allow that near infrared light back through to the sensor. You can see here, this is kind of a textbook example of the reflectance of healthy and unhealthy vegetation. There are differences in the other channels as well. So we're pretty good at this, actually. If you look at some wheat, you can see different shades of green. The darker greens tend to be healthier. The lighter greens tend to be less healthy. But what we're measuring with our eyes is this small difference in reflectance. Whereas in the near infrared and in the red edge, there's a much larger difference. So when we're trying to sense this with a sensor and then apply math to quantify crop health, it makes a lot more sense to be using these channels up at the upper end in the near infrared. There's also these bands called red edge, which is just beyond red. The first few, typically about 50 nanometers into the near infrared, is gathered as a separate channel often. And that's used more for stress than overall health, and also for a lot of maturity indexes. The red edge becomes important. So this chart was kind of when you convert one of these cameras, which is what everybody was doing until 2018 really is when multispectral started to become affordable. This is the light that we were using. We were using broad bands of light and trying to do math on that. The multispectral cameras, the advent of them really changed the way we collect that light, the light and the data, by really narrowing down the individual bands to where we get a green channel that's only 50 nanometers wide, or a red edge channel that's only 20 or 25 nanometers wide, just taking these very small snippets. And I guess I should have explained at the start, what you're looking at along the bottom is the wavelengths. Along the side is the percentage of light in that wavelength that's being reflected. So a higher value means more light reflected. Near infrared is reflected by eggplants, and most of it is being absorbed, or a substantial portion of it is being absorbed by a healthy plant. Skip that slide, too much text. Okay, so the vegetative index that all of you would have heard of is NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. The reason that everybody's heard of this one is we all tend to kind of aggregate to just using one indicator, and this has kind of become the standard for crop health. It's also the most widely applicable, and that's why we've adopted it as our most commonly used index. It's been on Landsat satellites since 1979, and when drones started to come to the market as a higher resolution, more immediate way of remote sensing, we just always copy what's available on satellite. It makes for a great way to transfer knowledge, to transfer data, to combine data, to use satellite imagery, for example, with a fresher and higher resolution drone scan. NDVI is essentially always the same type of formula. There are different ones here. You're seeing the NDVI red, which is the most commonly used. And essentially what's happening is the red band is being used to normalize, that's where the terminology comes from, the reflectance from the near infrared. So it's an index value, near infrared minus red over near infrared plus red, and all of the NDVI values, and there are other ones too, green, blues, and there's other permutations of using these channels. All of them either give you an index of 0 to 1 or minus 1 to 1. Typically 0 and below is no vegetation at all. Something in the 0.4 range, 0.5 range might be some vegetation, somewhat actively growing. 1 is the ultimate. That'd be complete canopy cover, most actively growing vegetation possible. The reality is a lot of people didn't buy multispectral cameras. I mean, the Red Edge P that we now have for $12,000, if you want, you couldn't buy that type of equipment 5 years ago. And much inferior cameras cost more than that back then as well. The Red Edges initially were in the same price range and had much lower resolution. And much slower data capture rates. So what happened was people were buying regular cameras as opposed to multispectral cameras, and they still wanted vegetation index crop maps. And so there are some that work somewhat well. TGI is one of them, and then Vary. Those are the most commonly used indicators of crop health developed just from 3 channels, blue, green, red. And you can imagine which of those is really the channel. It's greenness, right? So rather than have near infrared in these formulas, you have green being normalized by the red and blue. And this actually works quite well. If you don't have a multispectral camera and you just want to see overall crop health, see good and bad parts of a field, Vary works quite well, actually. And in a lot of cases for agricultural use, it really is good enough. If you just say, wanted to apply a variable rate fungicide application to some wheat, and you want to figure out where there's hardly any wheat growing, this is still going to give you that index because there's very little green in those locations, if that's the type of data that you need, if that's good enough. So in terms of vegetation indexes, NDVI, like I was saying, is by far the most common. And it's kind of been commodified now. The European Space Agency has made Sentinel-2 data available to all of us. And I'll show you later in Pix40 Fields, you can actually pull in, I think it's about 7 years of historical data, including the most recent Sentinel-2 shots, right in that software. And frankly, a lot of that imagery is available completely free if you know how to process it. We won't go into that level of processing here with QGIS and ArcGIS, but it's easy to get satellite data. It's passive, and most importantly, can let you look backward when drone shots really are confined to whatever I fly today. I can image. If I didn't fly last year, well, there's no way for me to collect that data, and satellite can give us that. So I really like Pix40 Field software. I think that'll come through here. We do sell that software too, but we sell it because I love it, not the other way around. It really is second to none in terms of being able to collect data with a drone and present it in a way that provides value to research or to the farmer, frankly. I sell the same piece of hardware to farmers that want to create boundaries and prescriptions for their spraying drones. These are the most popular other indexes. There are literally hundreds of them. If you go through the academic literature, You'll find hundreds of different vegetative indexes, and I'll show you where you can find some of those if you are looking for something specific. Over the years, we've had a few researchers that hired us. I mean, our primary business at Landview is selling hardware and educating people to use that hardware rather than us doing that as a service. But I do like doing that for researchers because it helps us learn, helps us tune our skills and know how to use the software. So there have been researchers that would approach us with, well, I'm thinking specifically WDVI. I had no idea what WDVI was, but sometimes you'll have that very specific request because there's been one academic study that used WDVI and it looks like it's a good indicator of disease in potato. You'll get a request for a specific indicator. The way you can find out about that is there's this database online, the IDB. What's it called here? There's the URL, the index database. So essentially they have a database of all the different vegetative indexes and the formula to go with it. If you're using satellite-based sensors, it also lets you look up the satellites that you could access data from and which indexes could then be developed from that. So it's a reverse lookup in that way as well. So it gives you this whole set of different indexes to look at. I'll just give you an example here, the plant senescence reflectance index. And then it'll show you the formula. The nanometers is the specific bands that you're going to be looking for. And then what that really means is red minus green over red edge is what that formula means. So if you've got a sensor that has red, green, and red edge, you can now use that index along with NDVI and a whole bunch of others. I'll specifically try to run this one later when I show you how the software works and how you would run a custom index. The standard indexes are built in and so simple you could probably figure all of this out yourself. But the custom indexes are also there. So if you find a piece of literature that says we specifically find value in this index for predicting Y, then it's able to do that as well. So the overall mapping workflow, when we meet with you in April, you're going to be planning flight missions. Then you're going to be flying those. We'll stitch the imagery together. We're kind of reversing things a little bit here. You're going to get a chance to do the stitching and analyzing before you even collect data. But it will take you through this whole workflow out in the field. It may look cumbersome at first, but once you get the hang of it, this is actually all fairly simple. There's one piece of software in the middle. There's not a whole bunch of other ones, although I guess the controller for the drone has software, but it is a fairly seamless workflow and becomes very intuitive very quickly. So that first step is usually on a mobile device. With drones in the last 2 to 3 years, we don't even use tablets and phones anymore. They tend to all have their screen built in. What you're doing in terms of planning the mission is outlining the area that you want flown. So laterally, what do you want that polygon to look like? Which field do you want to image? You're also going to have to set your altitude, and that is inextricably linked with your resolution. So typically your resolution is what drives your altitude, not the other way around. For most farmers, I usually say legal altitude is 122 meters, and most of what you're going to need to see, you're going to see from up there, unless you need to count individual plants, right? Or if you want to see subparts of plants, if you're trying to do flea beetle counts, for example, there's no way that's going to happen from 400 feet up. But if you want general vegetation index type data, then we're flying at 400 feet, which is the legal altitude in almost every place here in Canada. So you're setting those, so you're setting the perimeter, you're setting the altitude, and then the last thing you're setting is the amount of overlap between images. And I'll show you why the overlap becomes important. It's the process of developing the orthomosaic that requires overlap between images. Once the drone, you hit start. Obviously, when you're mapping, you don't fly. You're not on the sticks trying to fly it in a straight line. It plans a mission, you hit start, the drone takes off, the drone lands, the drone does everything in between, takes every picture. Unless something's going wrong, you shouldn't have to intervene. Your job becomes monitoring the flight and monitoring the airspace. The drone's taking these hundreds of pictures. What you're looking at are plot maps that we generated back in 2015 with a fixed wing. So the drone is flying, well, it crabs into the wind, kind of flies sideways almost, and it pitches a little bit. And you can see in a lot of these pictures, it's not straight down. There's actually nothing wrong with this. It's surprising the way this whole photogrammetric process works. Sometimes it's best to have some images in there that are off angle and not straight nadir. What that looks like in terms of from overhead and the amount of overlap, what you're looking at here, if you see these white areas in the map, those are tents at field plots. This is Sarda in the South Peace region. We were at their field day. There's some plots hidden behind here, and those will pop out in a second. What I want to show with this image, though, is all those yellow lines or green lines are the outline of an image. This would have been flown with a 70%, 80% overlap. It's a very inefficient way to collect data. So the drone has to fly a lot of flight lines in order to get enough overlap between all those images to make them stitch together accurately. What is happening in the photogrammetric process then, it's called structure from motion, is the software is looking for unique points. So if we use this tent here again as the example, there's a peak on the top of that tent that's a little darker in this case than the rest of the tent. The software would look for that as a key point. So it'll say, aha, I see this very unique point. Where else in all these images can I find that same unique point or series of points? And it uses that to stitch the imagery together. The analysis I like to do is back in the day when we had 35mm cameras, if we wanted a panorama, we'd take 3 or 4 pictures, and then you'd look at the base of a tree and use that as a way to slice 2 images together, or at the top of a grain bin and use that unique point as a way to put those 2 images together. The software does that, only it does it in 3D space. So with traditional photogrammetry, you always end up with a 3D model, whether the software sells you that as part of the package or that's an upsell. You are stitching that imagery in 3D space to create the 2D orthomosaic. So this is the orthomosaic. An orthomosaic is simply a series of pictures all stitched together to create one large image. It's also georectified and de-skewed and color balanced. There's a whole lot that happens there. But that's essentially the first product in almost every case when we're using a drone is an orthomosaic. The only exception there is if you have a point source piece of data, LiDAR. With LiDAR, we create point clouds rather than orthomosaics because it doesn't cover the entire surface with data. So step 4, after you've created this orthomosaic, is to then do the analysis on it. By false coloring these images and doing math on the individual data points, it really makes the data easier for humans to interpret. You can see here now, earlier it probably wasn't quite as apparent, but most actively growing vegetation, this was in July in 2015, was the bush and the ditches. You can see a few plots here. If I could zoom in on the screen, I can't right now, but you can see some of these plots had a fair bit of green in them as well. But this was mowed out winter wheat in between the plots, so that's why it's red. It's dead plant essentially. The last step that I always tell people not to forget about is think about how you're going to get the final deliverables to your client or to the end user of that data. If you were collecting data for a farmer, figure out how to get it into the farmer's hands quickly enough for him to be able to make a decision. And for farmers, often speed trumps accuracy. And Pix40 Fields is not perfect. If it has a failing, it's on the accuracy side. It's not on the speed side. It is much faster than any of the other software out there. If you need more accurate data, especially in terms of elevation, then you're going to use other software for that.
Software is he using?
Pix40.
But he sells it, he said.
Yeah.
So will we need it?
Sorry?
I think they were just talking to each other.
Oh, okay. Okay. let me know if this video doesn't play properly. Normally, I always start with the drone flying outside the hall so people can visualize how this actually plays out in the field so you see the data collection. So I thought I'd just play a few minutes of this video just so you see the calibration process that happens and the data collection itself. If the video doesn't play, please stop me, or if it's too.
I can't hear it.
Yeah, we're not getting sound, is that?
You're not getting sound?
No.
No.
Okay, let me see how I can get that. I usually think I'm not bad at using Teams, but not a good track record today. I guess I'll just silence him. I'll narrate it for you. Okay, so what he's doing here is he's set up at the field edge. Typically, all you require is a controller and a drone. That's it. In some rare instances, if you're flying hyperspectral cameras, you would still use a laptop with a set of antennas connected to it, but almost without fail, if you've bought a piece of equipment in the last few years, you got a controller, and that's all you need in the field. Ideal is if you have a data connection as well, though. So the drone he's flying here is a Mavic 3 multispectral. You'll see he was just pointing at the sensors. The bottom is an RGB sensor, a global shutter camera that basically is good for digital elevation modeling, but those top four are green, red edge, and near infrared channels. So that's what we're going to use to generate those NDVI images. So what he's going to do next is plan the actual mission itself. Skip ahead a little bit.
To the right of your screen there, is that a volume button? Does it look like that was set on low? Does that increase the
Oh,
sound?
this one, yeah, it was on. Uh-oh.
Sorry, I broke it.
Looks like I broke it. Do I dare restart? I guess I will. Okay, well, that's a good opportunity for a break in questions. Why don't I take a couple questions while this is restarting? Is this all old news for some of you? Are some of you already collecting drone data?
All I've done is fly. I haven't, and taken photos. I haven't done any data collection yet.
Ditto.
What
So
what level of drone, like if we have the Mavic 2, Mavic 3, for the most part in the department, what sort of sensors are on those, or how much do we have to upgrade to do some more of this more advanced stuff?
with the Mavic 3, it depends on the model. If it's a Mavic 3 or Mavic 3 Pro, then that's not capable of mapping. If it's a Mavic 2, both of those, the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 2 Zoom, both of them are capable of mapping. The difference between them is if they have an SDK that's been unlocked, a software development kit, then there's third-party software to pilot it. So in fact, there's some of the cheapest drones you can get. The Mini 2 is capable of mapping if you really wanted to. And the Mavic 2 is great for that too. But the Mavic 3 unfortunately isn't unless you buy the Enterprise series. And it's just a business decision by DJI to do that, right? They know that people that want to map are willing to pay $5,000 and up. People that don't want to map want their pricing to be in the $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 range, right? So they're just differentiating the market. So if you have a Mavic 3 Enterprise, Mavic 3 Thermal, Mavic 3 Multispectral, those three models are capable of mapping. The others aren't.
I have the Mavic 2 Pro and have used the Pix4 software, but it was more for working with a researcher out of Quebec on alfalfa fields, and they sent me the screenshots how to exactly step by step map my field and get it to fly. But I guess I'm curious whether it probably doesn't have the NDVI sensors, or could it use the Vary formula?
That's right. So you could use Vary or TGI now. It is perfectly capable of mapping. There's apps that are free. The most expensive and best app would be $150 for the year, and that'll let you stitch 30 maps a month and do all the flying. So it's a really affordable way to get just general maps,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have an near-infrared sensor. There is a company that builds add-on sensors. If you wanted a cheap way to turn that into a crop health sensor, Centera makes sensors. We used to sell them. I don't anymore. We still have a few in stock if you are interested. We'll charge you almost nothing for that if you want to go the cheap way of getting near infrared. Okay, let me try sharing again now. Hopefully this will work. There we go. Okay, so I'll just explain what Nathan was going to do there in that video. Like I said earlier, you use a controller, you've got a background map from satellite or manned aircraft, so just Google Maps essentially. You outline the area you want to fly. You don't even need to be accurate in terms of that, right? Because of the field of view of a drone when it's 400 feet up is quite wide. And so you're somewhere close to the boundary and it just flies a grid pattern. The one thing he did show in that video as well is the calibration process. If you want to compare data from one visit to the next, then you need to calibrate for the amount of incident light. That changes from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., frankly. The angle of light changes in addition to the intensity throughout the day. And certainly from one day to the next or from one location to the next, you would need to calibrate. So you need a picture of a calibrated reflectance panel of some sort. The really cheap way, I know some of the satellite guys do this, they'll take Tyvek sheets, which are highly standardized in the way they're made, and the reflectance and all the different wavelengths is kind of a known value or can be tested. There are, though, calibration panels, and at this point I wish I had it here, but actually, let me just grab it real quick. So it's a very simple system. This won't work very well, will it? If I put my body behind it. Yeah, it's really confusing. So there's a QR code that lets the software read what the values are, and below it, that gray panel has known reflectance. You simply take a picture with a multispectral camera or multispectral drone before takeoff. You want sun on the panel, no shade, and a picture straight down of that panel. The software then automates the rest of the calibration process. These panels are expensive though. They're $500 US for the cheap ones. So if you share that between researchers is typically the way that happens. Okay, so the drone has now flown, it landed itself. What you're getting as the only product from that drone flight is an SD card full of data. That data for almost every system is just going to be either TIFF or JPEG files. And in both cases, there's a lot of data embedded in that file in addition to the image itself. So in the case of a JPEG, it's called an EXIF JPEG. That means the pitch and roll of the aircraft is recorded for each picture, the X and Y and Z location of where the drone was when that picture was taken. All that type of data is embedded in each image. You throw that into these orthomosaicing engines. We'll get into the how-to later, but what comes out the other end is one of 4 different products. In the case of LiDAR data, you get something called a point cloud. And it looks kind of grainy like this because it is literally just a series of points, typically like 10 to 50 centimeter gaps between them, which is why it's appropriately named the point cloud. That only happens with LiDAR data. With cameras, you get a DSM and a mesh and an orthomosaic. So the DSM is digital surface model. Like I was saying earlier, the photogrammetry process where it's looking for those key points stitches this in 3D space. So you automatically get a 3D model in the process of getting to an accurate 2D model. Unless you need speed. And this is where Pix4D Fields shines. You choose two different processing methods. If you use fast, it doesn't do the 3D model. It goes straight to stitching and orthomosaic. If you need accuracy, it takes much longer, hours rather than minutes. You also get the digital surface model. And then lastly, this probably won't apply to most of you, but there is also a mesh where you're now draping the imagery, the orthomosaic, over top of a 3D model. It's called an OBJ file. So this is for modeling for computer games, for public works, if they want to model a neighborhood, construction, that type of thing. Not typically something we use in agriculture much. So here's the official definition. The best definition, I'm leaning on Esri here. ArcGIS is kind of the granddaddy in this space. Here's their definition. An orthomosaic is a photogrammetrically orthorectified image product, mosaicked from an image collection, so from many to one, where geometric distortion has been corrected. And there's a lot of distortion. The cameras themselves have some fisheye effect, different degrees, but you need to remove all of that type of distortion in the process as well. The imagery has been color balanced because from one shot to the next, the lighting can change slightly and that needs to be balanced out. And then lastly, it produces a seamless mosaic data set. So that's their definition of orthomosaic. The way I usually put it is a detailed, accurate map created from many images. That's all it is. So drone flies along, takes all those pictures. Then there's the black box that you throw this into that does all of the photogrammetry and orthomosaic stitching, and you end up with one image out of many. And we wouldn't need to do this, frankly, if we could fly much higher with the drone. But we're limited to 400 feet. So if you want a map of tens of acres, and if you want to measure things and get the elevation, the only way you can do that is this orthomosaicing process. So here's some of the software options. There is software needed for flight control as well. I used to spend a lot of time on the flight control software. Now, when you buy a new drone, you get the software with it. There's a controller that already has the software pre-installed. At most, you would do an update on that software, but that's automated as well. So really, there's not much thought you need to put into the flight control software anymore. They pair the right software with the drone, and unless you've got some very unique needs, usually that will meet your needs. For those of you that have older equipment, like if you have a Mavic 2 Pro, it's an amazing mapping system. You can get a lot of acres out of it too. It had remarkably long flight time when mapping. Map Pilot Pro is the app that I'd recommend for almost all of those older models. It's $150 for a year for the subscription. That gives you the flight control software and the map creation software for limited acreage, not for thousands of acres, but for tens of acres, 30 times a month. So I won't spend a whole bunch of time on the flight control software here. You get to try that for yourself when we're out in the field. It's very intuitive. I could literally give you the controller and you'd figure it out, but we'll show you how, and then you can do that. We'll spend more time now on the map creation and the agronomic analysis. I caution against thinking that the drone software, Pix4D Fields or any others, is the be all and end all, because they are all made to appeal to novice users. So they have the easy button. They're adding on new features all the time to keep people interested in their software. But ultimately, some true GIS software is probably what you should be using if you want to layer it with other data, because the drone data doesn't stand by itself. Soil data is important with that. If you've got measurements from those plots for, number of pods on a plant, you want to be able to combine data with each other and that will still take other software. Don't expect the drone software to ingest other things and then analyze it. It really is only good at processing drone or satellite data and turning it into GeoTIFFs, shapefiles, KMLs, standard file formats that you then combine in other software for the ultimate analysis. So the software that I'll speak to and give you access to, they're all trials that these companies offer anyway. So I've all aggregated them all in one place, makes it easy for you to download them to your machine. Pix4D has a suite of different software. The three that are worth looking at for what you do is Mapper, Matic, and Field. So they all start with Pix4D Field and then Pix4D and then end with Field, Matic, Mapper. I'll get into the differences between them in a second. Pix4D and Agisoft really were the leaders in this market. They were like the VHS and beta of this space for a long time. Agisoft has kind of lost that battle, although there's still quite a few users and they're actively developing their software. So Agisoft is an option you could look at. I don't have much experience with it, and frankly wasn't impressed when I did use it, but it is, for some users, it's still their preferred choice. Then DJI Terra, and I'll explain in a second why we're looking at that one. And then WebODM is the freeware option. And then lastly, if you start collecting remote sensing data of any kind and you have some time to learn something new, your best use of time would be learning QGIS. It's just an amazing tool. This webinar is too short to get into that, but essentially it lets you combine any kind of georeference data with each other. Okay, so Pix4D Fields is what we're going to focus on. I'd encourage you to use that first. If you're only going to try one piece of software with the sample data sets, try it with Pix4D Fields because your likelihood of success is highest and it's fastest, and it'll work on the lower end machines. I don't know what kind of computers you're running, but if you're stitching locally, it challenges the processing power, both CPU and GPU, if you're stitching locally. But there are online versions as well if you have internet but poor computers. So the Pix4D is photogrammetry software, all of it. So photogrammetry, measuring things with imagery. And the four products that are worth looking at are this Mapper, Matic, and Fields. Mapper is kind of the industry standard still. It's traditional structure for motion, three-dimensional modeling, photogrammetry. Has all kinds of features built in that let you achieve really high accuracy. So things like ground control point workflows, where you would put down markers, measure those with an RTK rover to get extremely high accuracy, and then get a digital elevation model that's within inches of real world location. Pix4D Mapper is definitely the software for that. They're the industry standard. Pix4D Matic is one that they developed a few years back for higher acreage needs. So a lot of the mapping we've done has been thousands of acres, right? We're mapping Canada thistle on Elk Island National Park, right? And we're doing 750 or 1,000 acres a day. Stitching that in Pix4D Mapper would be so time prohibitive and result in so many crashes that they developed this Matic that just has a different workflow and still can churn through those large data sets. So if you have a need for that or extremely high resolution, Pix4D Matic is worth looking at. Otherwise, it's overkill for most people. WebODM I include in this list because it's priced right for a lot of people. It is absolutely free. If you spend $57, it simplifies the install process. But if you're downloading from GitHub, it's free. With a Windows install system, $57 one-time purchase, no subscription. So if you have a good computer, this actually is a pretty decent process. And if you have lots of operator time, so if you've got summer students that want to learn these things anyway, they're interns, and part of the reason they're working is to learn, WebODM might actually be a great opportunity for them to really immerse themselves in remote sensing and the processing. But it's too slow for most people that are using this at commercial scale. DJI Terra I include in the list because it's free upfront. So anybody buying Mavic 3 Enterprise, Mavic 3 Multispectral, which other software? Oh, the ZenMuse L1 LiDAR sensors. All of them come with DJI Terra for either 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. And it's a great way to hook people, right? Give them their first piece of software for that piece of hardware. They tend to use the free one first, and if it's good enough, they keep using it and renew their subscription. It's also affordable in the long term. It's only $300 US a year, which is in this space very affordable. Pix40 Fields, by comparison, is $300 a month. Quite a different price point. And DJI Terra is also required as the first processing step for any of the ZenMuse LiDAR hardware. That first step is proprietary. After that, you can process the data in other software. And then the last one that I think is worth looking at if you have time for learning sometime, QGIS it's like learning how to use a spreadsheet, essentially. It opens up a whole nother world when you learn how to use GIS software. And QGIS is community supported freeware. I've been using it now for about 10, 11 years. Not an expert user yet. It's all self-learned though, and it is entirely possible to just pick the basics up in a day or two. And it opens up a whole nother world of opportunity because GIS systems are built to just accept any type of geographic information. So you can download provincial boundaries from one location, some satellite data from 20 years ago from some other place on the internet, then combine that with your current drone data. And that's where the magic really happens, is when you combine all these different types of data with each other. And QGIS is the freeware version of that. ArcGIS is still the industry leader, but for commercial use, it starts at $10,000 a year. So I find most people don't use ARC. Post-secondary students often will come with some ArcGIS skills because it's $10,000. For commercial use, it's zero when you're in school. They've got a really good marketing model. So all these students are coming out with ArcGIS skills, and they'll want to use ArcGIS if they have GIS skills. So be prepared to pay for that software if that's what they're going to use. QGIS is more capable at $0. And that leads us to Pix40 Fields, which is where I'm going to spend most of our time here today, the remaining 40 minutes or so. So Pix40 Fields is designed specifically for precision agriculture, okay? And they're developing it all the time. Every 2 to 3 months, there's a new version that adds more functionality and more functionality. Initially, it was just a really fast way to develop an orthomosaic. And by fast, I mean 5 minutes instead of 3 hours. It's that big a difference. And the beauty here is it's going straight to a 2D orthomosaic. That's what creates that speed. Over time, they've also now added the ability to calculate all the vegetation indexes. They've added zoning tools, and they have a way to extract the data from that. Take the averages of the NDVI of all the different plots, for example. So that's what I'll take you through now. I'll switch to the software itself so that you can see the process of stitching an orthomosaic, trimming the data, creating the indexes. And hopefully I can still get us through all of these elements because this is stuff you can once you have the sample data, you can try all of this and it's going to be fairly straightforward. Once you know where on the screen to find all the tools, you can just play around with it and try it yourself. So I'll switch to Pix40 Fields now. So this is the Pix40 Fields main screen. In the bottom right corner, there's a plus icon. That's where you would start a new mission. If I wanted to do satellite, I could do that. I'll start with drone data. So I'm just going to go to folder on the left, choose some data. Let's do, somebody had a Mini 2 Pro, right? Let's do Mini 2 Pro flown at 400 feet. Oh, not that one. We'll try that at 61 meters. So you'll see the first thing it's going to do is read all the EXIF metadata with each of these images. So it's finding out where the picture was taken, essentially, and it's going to show us on the screen where this folder of pictures came from. You can see in the background here, it was flying north-south lines. This was over some plots at Lakeland College is where these data sets came from. Many of the ones that I'm sharing with you are from Lakeland College. We get two choices. Fast processing is 5 minutes. Accurate processing is several hours, but will give you accurate height modeling, especially. That's the biggest difference. The stitching laterally, really, there isn't a big difference. You can also ratchet down the resolution if all you need is 50 centimeter pixels. You could do that and it would take much less time. You hit apply and then start processing. So what it'll do now is it'll pull in the individual images, and you'll see those start to come in here in a second. Pulls in the pictures next to each other, and you can see how some of them are misaligned. And as it processes, you'll see it start to deskew them already, start to color balance them. So again, this is Mavic 2 Zoom. This is just a regular RGB sensor, regular camera. It's a 12 megapixel rolling shutter camera. So for accuracy, this is not going to give you 2-inch accuracy, but for most of what we need, this is plenty accurate enough, and the resolution is still incredible. Sorry, Mavic 2 Pro, wasn't it? Mavic 2 Pro flown at 61 meter altitude, which is about 200 feet. I'll just let this finish, and then we'll actually use this data set for the rest of it as well. Questions while we wait the minute or two here for this to finish?
Hey, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Just regarding the light calibration you talked about earlier. It occurs to me like during a flight, the light might be changing, or I don't know, cloud or something like that. Does the drone, does the camera account for this kind of thing during a data collection?
This particular drone would not. It's just a regular camera, and it has no incident light sensor. All of the multispectral systems that are currently on the market do. They have an incident light sensor that mounts on top of the drone. So every time it takes a picture, it's measuring the amount of incident light and the amount reflected, and then using that in the software to normalize that. If you've got really spotty clouds, even that isn't good enough because of the angle, the time lag and the angle of the light. If you've got it at, say, 9 a.m., the shadow is actually being cast in front of the drone, not behind it. So really spotty clouds don't work. Uniform cloud cover is just fine. In fact, some of the best mapping is with uniform cloud cover rather than brightest sunlight, but bright sunlight does work as well at every time except right around solar noon. You know, within 20 minutes of solar noon, you'll end up with some really bright spots sometimes if you're imaging straight nadir. The other thing with light is if you've got plots anywhere close to the edges of the fields and there would be shadow from trees, then you'll also need to make sure that you're close to solar noon. I mean, it's fairly forgiving up in our northern climate here, where from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is usually good enough. But if you have a lot of tall trees next to it, that shadow is hard for it to normalize it. Well, it attempts, the software tries to normalize for that, but it is challenging. So this is the final ortho mosaic. I'll just zoom in so you kind of see the level of detail you're getting. This is flown from 200 feet, and you can probably see what's in the back of my pickup there. Tonneau cover's open. There's a generator. So fairly high resolution that you get out of these things. This is a base station sitting here. We put out ground control points. One thing I'd recommend, if you are going to be repeatedly imaging the same site for research, put down some kind of markers. In this case, we were using these canvas markers. It's easy in the imagery to pinpoint the center of it, and once during the season, if you do a permanent marker of some sort, get a surveyor to just mark those accurately, and that helps with the entire season worth of imaging. The easiest thing would be kind of a 2x2 foot or 3x3 foot plywood sheet with a stake through the middle to just stake it down. That's worth doing. If it was a plot site like this, I'd suggest at least 5, 4 in the corners, 1 in the middle. 10 would be better. If nothing else, you can use it to manually realign the imagery later. Using it during the stitching process is great in things like Pix4D Mapper, But if you end up with a situation where it is misaligned, it'll become very obvious when those markers don't align with each other. If you're doing plot level research anyway, it's pretty easy to get this to align with the next shot as well. Okay, so this is the orthomosaic. The next step would typically be trimming it if I was doing this for someone else. This one's not as jagged, but the edges always look ugly and the dead always looks prettier if you clean it up. So the easy way to do that is create a boundary, and you can simply click away, create the boundary, and use that to trim. And then it'll clean off all the excess. So everything you'll see around that boundary now is just base data from a few years ago, and all the data that we collected on this day will be contained within that boundary. There we go. So this is the data we actually want. The next step would be to create some indexes. So most of your tools are over here. There are a few on the right-hand side here as well, but most of the tools are over here. So I can go to Index and choose the vegetative index vary, visible atmospherically resistant index, which is essentially greenness. Over on the right-hand side, both for the orthomosaics and all these indexes, is visualization settings. So there's the finished vary model. You can see the differences here between these plots. They really pop in the NIR. There are some other color modes here. You can view them in grayscale and red, green, and turbo. These are kind of outdated. I mean, in some ways, it's a nice way to get this yellow. This was kind of a standard 4 or 5 years ago, but almost everybody uses red to green as vegetation index maps nowadays. So typically leave that at red, green. You can change the histogram here to remove data or to accentuate variability. So if I move this slider to the left, it adds more of the low NDVI values. If I move it to the right, it'll exclude more of those. And in fact, if I move it a little more to the right, it'll exclude them entirely, so that you can just see the plots as opposed to all that mowed out winter wheat between them. If I take that back out, same thing on the top end. If I want to accentuate the variability here, I would typically set this to solid, so it still stays a solid color, and just bring in more green. It's just aids the human brain in understanding what you're looking at. That's all that's happening here. The numbers aren't changing. It's just the way that you're looking at the data. Okay. I should probably go to some other indexes too. I'll just switch to the pre-baked pie now, because one of the data sets that you're going to be getting is this one here. So Phantom 4 multispectral of those same plots. I'll create an index here that's not vary. So here's NDVI is the standard. I can also create those custom indexes. Anybody remember what the senescence index was? That's the one that I was going to do. I think it was red minus green. So, sorry, I should back up a little bit. These are the standard indicators on the left side. So if I just wanted to create NDVI, I could do that the same way I did vary. Hit generate, and it would create that map. It has the ability to create custom indexes. So I can define a new index, like the senescence index. If I could figure out how to spell it. And there it is. It's red minus green over the red edge. Or in this case, since it's drone imagery, I actually need to choose red edge. There we go. So these are just entered with the buttons here to create that formula. It tells you if that's a valid formula or not. And then you can preview that. That's what that index will look like. If I actually want that piece of data, then I can hit apply and it'll calculate that and generate a new orthomosaic that shows the senescence. in a second.
So what computer system do you need to run this?
A gaming laptop that cost you more than $1,500. I can send you the exact specs. I'll put that on that on the download page for the software. But that's kind of the type of laptop you'll need. It requires a decent video card and some decent speed on the CPU. It's nothing outlandish though. I mean, if it's a gaming laptop or a good business desktop, that will more than meet what you need for this. Okay, so there's this senescence index here. The other tools here, you can zone these as well. So if you wanted to use this to apply prescription, for example, I'll go through that process. There's a few different ways you can do that. You could create annotations, or the traditional way is this zonation, where I can then choose the layer that I want. Choose the boundaries that I want to calculate it within. Choose what prescription unit I want, and then create a prescription for creating the zones for applying a prescription. You choose the number of zones here, and I tend to start with the highest number. I start with a large number of zones, and then I can always have two of them be the same value. So I'll typically start with that, do a quantile analysis or equal. You can see the difference here in the histogram and the way it segregates those zones. You can exclude some zones and then choose the level of detail that you want in the zone. And there it is. So this could then be a prescription where I can set the rate for all of these color categories. So some of this then would obviously be a manual decision of farmer or agronomist deciding whether this area gets a high rate or a low rate and what that rate should be. The software doesn't do that as much as ag tech would like to let you believe. We don't need people anymore. You definitely need an agronomist or a decision maker here to make the decision on what the rates should be. But the process itself of going from the orthomosaic to the prescription is fairly straightforward. And this can then be saved as an operation. So I can now view all these things separately. Let me show you one more thing too. I really like the fact that we can include satellites. So I can always go back and import more data. So if I've flown another week, for example, I would name this orthomosaic June 1, and then orthomosaic June 8, or you can actually download satellite data for this as well. And if you've created a boundary, this part is highly automated. So it just goes to their database and pulls out the satellite data that's available. It defaults to today's date, which is obviously not what we're looking for. But you can choose your date here. Let's go, this would have been 2021. July of 21, I think I flew this. And it'll show us what the cloud-free days available are. Let's do August of 2021. It'll show us the level of cloud. These bars at the bottom are the amount of cloud obstruction. So you can see the days when it was 0% cloud, and I can choose those days, and it's actually showing us the average NDVI. So this is in August, which is exactly what you'd expect actually. So as the days continue into August here, you've got a 0.56 NDVI, then going down to 0.4, then 0.43 a week later. So you can get imagery of the progress in time. This one and this one, let's say. And I can now add that to the layers available. So in addition to the drone layers, I now have satellite layers. If I go to one of these, right here at the top, there's this compare that lets you visualize two of them at the same time.
What is the resolution on that satellite picture?
A 5 meter. So this is the difference between satellite and drone, right?
So for small plots, it's not really useful.
For small plots, it's not useful at all. If I go to the right side of this, these are, which company was that? That was Bayer was doing some trials here, different genetics. I mean, for that kind of stuff, you can kind of see in here, this is, it's getting the same area as here. You can see the lower yield area, but yeah, satellite really doesn't cut it for research trials, in my opinion, in most cases. Where it is useful is, let's say you've done these trials and you see this pattern in here where, to me, that looks like it's topography related, likely, not soil related, although the two tend to go together. This is in Vermilion, Alberta. You can go back to a few years ago and see how homogeneous that area was, right? You can actually see this here, that there is that difference. But if I go to another date, 2-3 years earlier, you can see if maybe there was an innate heterogeneity there that's causing some of those differences, right? So you can use the satellite to go backward. The resolution isn't great, but for just examining how homogeneous that plot area was when you start to see some differences, you could investigate some of those things with it. The other thing you can do, you can change any of the things that you're visualizing here. So I tend to do stuff like this, where if I want to figure out what is actually going on or what crop is there, because the NDVI usually doesn't show you much, right? From this, you can't tell what crop that is. But if I do this, I can probably figure out, well, I'm not sure I can tell that here either. If I had to guess, I'd say peas. But you can see all these different layers and pan back and forth across them, or just see them side by side.
Is 5-meter resolution for the satellite about average now, or is that?
No, it's still fairly high. 5 meters, what it's upsampled actually. So standard from Sentinel is either 10 or 20 meter, and Pix4D upsamples it to give you this 5-meter resolution. So there's some processing magic happening there to give you that resolution. I mean, most satellite is still 10, 20. If you buy from Planet, you can buy 3 meter or 50 centimeter, but 50 centimeter, just to give you a sense of what it costs for one county. I know a company that bought this last year, one shot, one day for a county level was $20,000. So 50 centimeter is great, but even for plots, 50 centimeters isn't good enough, and it's horrendously expensive. Compared to a Mavic 2 Pro that's already sitting in somebody's arsenal, or you could buy for $2,000. For a lot of uses, that's going to be much more useful data than the satellite will. Even without spectral calibration, there's a lot you can see here in terms of differences. You're not going to rely on the values, though, if it's just a standard camera without near infrared and without calibration. Let me show you one more thing here. So to extract data from something like this, let's say we had the senescence indicator here. There is a manual process here, so hopefully all of you have some summer students. You can see the plot outlines fairly clearly in the OrthoMosaic, so I tend to create the annotations in the OrthoMosaic rather than in this, but you could do it in this as well. For today, I'll just do it in here for simplicity. But you just create annotations in here, and typically you always make sure you're always inside so you don't get any edge effects, and create the individual plots. And it auto names them now. So as I click away at these, it'll create the next number up. You see it's naming it plot 1-3. Then when I go to the next range, I would manually switch that to 2-1. And then keep clicking away in that range. And it's auto numbered again. Okay, so all I've done is create those annotations. I can now export those. So export is over here. I'll show you a few of the other exports as well, but let's do the statistics first, because I assume this is probably the one of highest interest to you. So statistics, I can choose which indicator I want. So in this case, the senescence by drone. Choose whether I want that to be a comma delimited file or not. And let's choose another folder here. There's the mean indexes. It's also got, this took me a while to figure out what this meant. You see the visible here? That's based on the histogram that I set, the visualization there where I removed all of the extraneous data. So this really is based on the way that you've set the histogram. This includes all of the pixels in there. So this is soil and everything else. But it calculates all of the mean indexes for those. And the beauty of this is if you're doing this week after week, you can just reuse those same annotations, right? You can just copy these annotations, copy all of them on a different layer. So I can now copy it to the surface model, frankly, if I wanted. So when I go to the surface model, I can view the annotations on there as well. Or the satellite, or wherever I wanted those, right? You can copy them layer to layer. And so when I fly the same image again a week later, I can extract from exactly the same polygons those average values. And the CSV export, in my opinion, is one of the most useful things I've done. I'll show you the other exports that are possible, though. So I can share export individual layers. So if I choose those, then I output it as TIFF files, and these are very standard files. If you've got any GIS system, anyone that would normally receive geographic information of any kind, a TIFF is a standard file format. You hit export, and I won't click that now because it would take a couple of minutes, but you end up with the TIFF file output. This PDF report is kind of neat too. So if you just wanted to provide an update to others, you can just do a quick export. And that gives you a PDF that you can mail to people with all of the maps on them and the individual annotations with the values for them. I don't know why the values aren't there. Oh, there we go. So you can actually see the individual plots in this PDF with their average indexes. Let me see, what have I not covered in here? Well, maybe I'll open it up to questions here. We're coming up to an hour and a half already.
Hey, I have a question. This is Leanne speaking. In terms of exporting a file and making sure that it's not too huge for the people who are receiving the file, I'm wondering if you could go over it that quickly, clarifying some of those steps.
The file is going to be too huge. I mean, that PDF file that I just created is the only really small one, or here, I'll just switch back to that. The KML files tend to be much smaller than shape files as well if you were just exporting annotations. But if you want this to be, to have the resolution for a small crop plot like this, you are going to have files that are in the hundreds of megabytes fairly quickly, certainly in the tens of megabytes and too large for an email. So Dropbox export, you can't reduce the resolution on that here, though. It's just a wholesale export. This, if you really needed to, I guess QGIS or other software like that would be your way of reducing the resolution on that. But once you've created the map, you're stuck with that resolution. What you could do is process at a second time at low resolution. So at the original processing step, when I'd imported the images, I could choose there whether I wanted to output it as 50 centimeter pixels or 1 centimeter pixels. So you could stitch it a second time and then export that layer. I guess that'd be one way that you could do it, but you would have to create it as a separate layer.
Okay, thanks very much.
If we wanted to move away from some of this agronomic stuff and say you wanted to fly a manure pile or something like that and measure the volume, is that something that's possible with this Pix4D Fields?
Pix4D Fields is less than ideal for that. It does an elevation, but it won't let you measure volumes. Pix4D Mapper is the software for that, or WebODM, or DJI Terra. I was going to show you DJI Terra real quick too. I mean, this is what DJI Terra looks like. It's very similar, but it has more of those measurement tools around volumes as well, and the 3D visualization, as opposed to just 2D. Right, so this is the sample data set that I'll be sending you for LiDAR. You could try doing some volumes on the bales, for example. It'll let you measure the volumes on the bales and that type of stuff. That's all found here in the annotations and measurements, and you can outline the area you want, like so. And then it'll calculate the area for you. Other questions?
Yeah,
I'll
got
just-
one.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you select the formula that you use? How do you know when you need more information or different information?
So if you're not sure, if you're just trying to gather general crop health data, then NDVI early in the season and NDRE later in the season tend to be the two indicators. If you have people you're producing the data for that don't really know what they want, those tend to satisfy most users. If there's something very specific that you're trying to capture, flowering extent, maturity level, percentage ground cover, Googling your way to finding what the best data product is for that is frankly the best way. I mean, that vegetation index database that I had there, that really just gets you the formula. Actually, it does show you one more thing too. Here, I'll show you. All the academic research that has referenced that indicator is in there as well. So here. So for this plant senescence, for example, there's these studies in 1999 to 2003 that used those, one of them for sugarcane, leaf senescence. And these are all, if they are in a research gate or some type of place like that, those are all clickable and will take you right to the academic literature too, to see, you know, the evaluation of that indicator usually is what you'll find in there. But typically you're looking for a very specific thing and then looking that up in the academic literature to find which indicators, which indexes might work best for that situation. So what I'll be sending you in the next hour or so, once I get all these emails sorted, I've got all of your email addresses. I'll send you a couple of emails. One will be for the drone licensing if you're interested in that. I'll get into that in a second. And then secondly, this trial software. So all it is a compilation of the links to those 4 pieces of software that I'd suggest are worth trying if you want to play with different things. If you want to do volumes, you're going to use Terra or Pix4D Mapper. If you want agronomic research, it's Pix4D Fields. If you want to try the freeware to see if it'll work with your Mavic 2 Pro, WebODM might be the right solution as well. And then I'll have these sample data sets for you. If there's a specific one you want besides these, because that particular plot set that we had there, we flew every drone we could find that summer. So if there's a specific you want, like if you want some Mavic 2 Pro, just send me an email and I can add that to this list as well, add some other sample data sets. So those are just going to take you to a Dropbox folder with the raw data. And then you can start with the raw data and that trial piece of software and play with it. And then when we meet in April, if you have questions about that, you can send me emails in the meantime, or if you have questions and want to hold on to them, then we'll go through that together as a group when we meet out in the field. And then the other thing I'll send you is a link to this. So I don't really like online training all that much. Thanks for sticking with me for the hour and a half here. I don't mind delivering it. I don't like receiving it a lot of the time. So we do all of our training in person for the ground schools, but because of COVID, we were forced to create an online version. And that's what you're going to be seeing is Robin and I sitting down in front of our laptops during COVID, recording everything you need to get certified. So if you want to get certified to fly a drone, for data collection or otherwise, you need to get certified to fly anything over 250 grams. Then this would be a way to do that. So I'll send you a login to that, and then you can choose whether you want to do that or not. This is kind of what we'll go through in that course. So everything that you need for the basic knowledge requirements. It's about 3 hours of video. We go through the rules, like these are the categories you can fly. You can fly these and not other ones. And we'll take you through what all those restrictions are, where you can fly, where you can't fly, and get you right through to this thing, the test. And the test itself is with Transport Canada. There's the final section in that course is the how to take the test piece. That'll take you to the portal. It costs you $10 to write. You can write it every 24 hours, and nobody will ever ask for your score. All you need is 65% to pass. So we'll get you what you need to get 65%. 100 is really rare, but if you get one of those, let me know. We actually gamify this when we do courses, so I'll send you some kind of a gift if you get 100% on that. So I'll send those 2 emails to you in the next couple hours.
Is there much out there that can predict the yields based off of some of the photography?
Those plots that I was showing you there, that was the main reason I was there. I actually had some yield prediction plots there for canola where we fertilized them differently and different seeding dates just to see how closely we could predict yield. In most crops, the correlation to final yield is extremely high until it heads out or flowers. In canola, it's when it's bolting, not even flowering. When canola starts bolting, NDVI as a predictor of yield goes out the window, and that's essentially what I was testing is. And it turned out MCARI, M-C-A-R-I, was an indicator that worked fairly well, better than nothing. But yeah, that's kind of the secret is yield prediction goes out the window at heading out or the reproductive stage of a crop growth cycle.
So Marcus, you're going to send us the links to the free software as well?
Yep. Yeah,
Yep.
it's all on one web page on our website, and you can download the software, you can download the data sets all from there.
And then this basic training certificate, I know some of us have taken it, so it's actually, I don't know what it is, a few $100. So if you don't have your basic training certificate to fly some of these heavier drones, it's a good idea if you want to get it because it's included in this course.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll cost you $10. So it's a good deal. Thanks for hosting us. Thanks for making this possible, man. I mean, it wasn't free to everybody. Fan and Charlie.
Just to refresh my memory, I do have my certificate. How long is it valid for, or is there a renewal?
So there's something called recency. There's 5 different options and only 2 of them I recommend. So you can go take a flight review. You can get a Transport Canada certified course. The 2 I'd recommend, the easiest is an online quiz. Transport Canada has a quiz where you need to answer 23 questions as a refresher, and then you're good for another 2 years. Your certificate doesn't expire, but in order for your next flight to be legal, you need to have done something in the 2 years previous. So that quiz is the easy way. Or if you want to just write the test again for $10, you'd probably pass it, and that's probably more of a refresher than doing that quiz. But that's all you need to do. Either take the test again or fill in that what do they call it? Self-paced study course. But it's 23 questions and the answers are at the bottom of the page. You can actually cut and paste them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Hopefully I'll get to see all of you in April. And we'll get you flying some small equipment and big equipment. We're bringing spraying drones to that one too. We'll have that's the main reason we're out. So we have everything up to a 50-liter model, or sorry, 40-liter model that'll be there, like a 220-pound drone, right down to 249-gram drone. So we'll get you flying a whole bunch of different stuff.
And one last question, the recording will be sent out as well of this?
Yep.
Yeah,
It's
cool.
still recording. Perfect. I got to figure out where it's saved, but yes, I'll get that ready too.
Okay,
I
thank
have
you.
one quick question. It's a bit off topic, sort of, just related to what you just said. With spraying drones, do you know where we stand with regulations and whatnot yet?
Yes. Unfortunately, no pest control products for agriculture have been approved at all yet. There are 3 pesticides approved, and they're all biological larvicides for mosquito control. Nothing for, no herbicides, no fungicides, and just those biological insecticides. You can apply micronutrients, fertilizers, granular or liquid fertilizers. You can do whitewashing of greenhouses. You just can't apply pest control products. And unfortunately, that's what we all want, right? Without getting into too much of the details, I think we're still several years away from that becoming reality, but we will get a few products. There'll be one this year, most likely Garlon will be on label at industrial rates. So for vegetation management, we'll get our first product this year, but not another one has been applied for, so don't expect anything soon. In the meantime, all the farmers in your area will start spraying with them. It's equally illegal, but they call it off label, so it's all good.
All right, thanks very much, and thanks for the course. This was really great.
Thank you, Leanne. Enjoy your flight day with Bianca today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye, see you in April.
Thank you.